Hi!
Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now in this video, it is time for another random creature design. Now you guys really seem to like the last one where I did an ocelot, a fox, and a panda, and it was a really cute creature, and so I thought it would be fun to go again and try a new one. So let's get started, but also please like, subscribe, and do all that little fun stuff. It really does help the channel out, and only if you actually like this video. Don't feel like you have to or anything, but I would appreciate it if you did. And subscribe if you like my randomness and chaotic self. Okay, let's get started. So it all started with Twitch, where me and my viewers named a bunch of random animals and put them into a wheel, and then let that wheel randomly decide 3 animals for me to make a design from. And the first was moth, maned wolf, and owl. But spoiler alert, I changed moth to deer because I rolled it again because I couldn't figure out how to make moth work. I'm sure more competent people in designing random things could absolutely make that work. So if you guys have any ideas on how you would combine a moth, an owl, and a maned wolf, please let me know down in the comments. And if you even feel like drawing it, please tag me using the hashtag KPtutorial so I can see it, because I'm genuinely interested in how other people would combine these different animals together. Now, it also ended up causing some weird combinations like hamster, shark, and snake. And I refused this one for so long until all the Twitch viewers were like, you have to at least draw it. Which caused an barrage of a bunch of different versions of a shark, hamster, and snake that we ended up calling a snarpster. And he is our little mascot, and he is a long noodle of fluffy, sharp teeth, and like even like a bunch of Discord members got involved, and like they made their own little snarpsters, and it was just really fun. So if you guys would like to be more involved, please go follow me on Twitch. I would love to see you guys there. So with the animals picked and the design decided, it was time to get started. And I actually have an owl mold that I made a while back that I never really get the chance to use. And so I actually already had a cast. So I'm just showing you some footage from a previous video of how I go about making my casts. If you want to have more information, please go check out these other videos. They are way more in depth. I just wanted to give this to give a little bit of backstory of why I just suddenly have an owl head here, and here we have an owl head. And now that we have an owl head, we can get started on armature time. So please enjoy ASMR armature making time. So you'll notice instead of putting the armature all the way down, I actually ended the sockets with wire, and that's because I want to do something a little bit different than normal, and I'm going to need some cosplay for that. So since the design is going to have a deer body, I really wanted to have thin, dainty legs. And that is pretty difficult to achieve when you do art dolls the normal way, which is quilt batting and sewing and then trimming it down to make it as thin as possible. And so I thought, I have so much cosplay, which is just a flexible polymer clay, that why not try to make the legs out of that and see if I can achieve that dainty look I want and still have it be poseable. And when I tell you that this stuff worked really well, just having a durable, strong wire that can bend against the force of the cosplay just worked perfect, and it bends so well. And so for anybody who has cosplay or wants thin, dainty legs, or just something thin, flexible, I highly recommend this stuff. Once the legs were done, it was time to add more maned wolf aspects, and that is going to be adding ears onto the owl head. And for that, I'm going to be using epoxy sculpt. Now, it was difficult to decide what aspects the maned wolf would have throughout this design, and I ended up with the coloring mostly, but I did want a few body accents, and I went with the tail and the ears. And now, I did also think about adding deer antlers, but I found that they were fighting for too much headspace on the drawing, so I figured they would definitely have to fight for headspace on the actual piece, so I just opted to go with the ears instead. Which was good because I barely even had room for these guys, so there was no way I was gonna have room for antlers too. Once the epoxy has cured, it's time to build up the body. And for that, as always, I'm using quilt batting, which just comes in these long sheets because they're, you know, made for quilts. And I'll cut it into strips and wrap it around the body over and over until it's built up to how thick I want. Making sure to keep in mind not to build it up quite as thick as I want the end result to be, because I have to keep in mind whatever fabric I'm going to add on top of that is going to add additional thickness. But like I always say, if you want chunk, 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 boy, you go and you get chunk, 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 boy. If you want thin, 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 boy, you go and you get thin, 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 boy, okay? We support all body shapes and sizes here. Now this one was definitely thin, 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 boy, okay? We wanted something delicate and thin and lanky, and it could just frolic through the forest. That's the kind of vibe we were going for. I'm popping in for your not-so-daily, really quick reminder that, hey, if you've been thinking about doing something, go do it. I absolutely believe in you. You should go be drinking water, okay? You gotta go stay hydrated. And I love you, and you're awesome, and okay, bye. For the body, I'm going to be using this beautiful auburn color, and it's going to be perfect for the main wolf, and I use it for foxes, and my flying fox bats is just a go-to color for me. And I always say I'm definitely not the person to come to for sewing advice, because half the time I don't know what I'm doing. I'd definitely say go to somebody way more competent, like Enchantarium, because they are just sewing gods and face up gods, and they're just awesome and amazing. And I'm sure there's tons other sewing gods and goddesses over there, because I am not one of them, okay? I just stitch it together and hope for the best and pray it never falls apart. That's my method of sewing, and that's all we do. Once we stumble our way through sewing, it's time to trim up the body, because this is supposed to be a lanky, thin boy, and so he cannot be super, super floofy. And for this, I'm going to be using a pet shaver, which is just a really great tool to have if you're going to be making multiple art dolls, as it just gets the fur off in bulk and really smoothly. And it comes with a bunch of different guards, so you can trim the fur down in varying lengths. But even still, I always like to go back in with scissors just to make sure to clean up all the leg joints especially, and to get anything that the trimmer might have missed. To blend the face into the body a little bit better, I decided to fur the edges. And before I do that, I always like to give a little base coat in the fur color that I'm going to be using, so that way if I miss anything, that it won't be like a stark white you see. And then once I'm done doing that, I can get started on airbrushing. And I'm not doing anything too fancy because the main wolf is pretty much just all an auburn all over, but I wanted to give a little bit of tonal variation just to add a little bit more interest. Since I had the airbrush already out, it seemed like a good idea to go ahead and start the gradient on the legs to black like a maned wolf would have. Once all the airbrushing was done, it was time to get back to the face and finish painting it. And you can see why I didn't do it right away, because all the overspray would have gotten all over the face. Now for the face, I'm actually doing a very similar, if not identical way to how I painted Owlbear, if you guys have seen that video, where I did a nice creamy base face, and then I actually go in with pastels for some subtle shading. I just felt it added a more softer touch instead of doing like a harsh paint job. I just think it looked really, really good and gave that more, I'm dainty, I'm just a cute little forest creature look. And you can see the difference. It is subtle, but it definitely is there. Instead of going super fantasy with the eye colors like I tend to like to do, I decided to keep it more natural and just went with a hazel yellow eye. And to make the eyes really pop, I like to go over them with a little layer of UV resin. It just looks so lifelike. I love it. Now, let's talk about the wings. Because normally I would have some fancy footage of how I got these beautiful creations and stuff, but I wasn't expecting to have to film this because I was thinking I was going to be doing something else. So I kind of did this as like a plan B situation, and plan B ended up being the only plan because I didn't like how plan A was, because plan A was to make big open wings, but I didn't like how it looked on him. So I decided to do closed wings because it, again, felt with that little dainty, like I'm just kind of frolicking, you know, I'm just walking down a path and just, hello, I'm just on the ground. Hi, would you like to say hello? You want a mushroom? I'm just rambling now. So I am sorry I don't have any footage of this to explain it better, because I wasn't planning to have any footage because I thought the plan A would definitely work. But here I'm just painting these 3D printed wings in the same colors of a maned wolf, just making sure they gradient to a dark tip. And then to attach them, which was always the plan, I'm going to be actually using magnets because I do want them removable, because I do like this guy's body shape a lot. To the point where I was like, well, I want the wings removable just so I can look at it, because it looks pretty as just his own little foresty, I'm a ground dweller vibe. So I coiled up the wire that was sticking out of his body and used that as a base to glue the magnets on, but that doesn't look very good. So I actually took pieces of the fabric and just glued them around that wire and glued the magnet in and kind of like sandwiched it between the pieces of fabric. This probably makes no sense, but hopefully the footage shows you what I'm talking about. And I just sandwiched the wire and the magnet in between two pieces of fabric so that way it blended into the body a little bit better, but you could still attach the magnets together because thankfully the faux fur fabric is not thick at all. The backing is very, very thin. And here it is attached, and you can even like slightly pose it if you want the wings up or down. And the magnet is actually really, really strong, and those wings are not coming off unless you pull it with some force. But we have one more thing left to do. I do not like how it's just like a blunt start to a wing, and I don't like how the very tips of the wing look. So I thought I would actually glue a little bit of the faux fur at the very edge of the beginning of the wing, just so that it kind of acted like those little, what is that called, covets? I'll put a picture of what the feathers are, because I don't remember what they're called, but just to simulate that and to have it blend better into the fur. And as you can see right here, it just blends so nicely and it looks so much better than if it was just that stark start to the wing. And this is where I would normally say it's all done, and with that it's time to look at the final montage. But I actually want to do something a little bit different, which seems to be the theme of this video, but I want to make a base for him, a sort of miniature diorama, if you will. So let's get started on that. For the basis structure, I'm going to be using MDF board, and I have plenty of those left over from when I did the tall neck video. And to add on top of that, I'm actually going to be using some pink XPS foam. I know all the terms from all the diorama and miniature people that I've been watching. It's XPS foam. But before I glue it on, I'm actually going to rough up and sand the base so that it adheres a little bit better. Once glued on, I'm just going to be sketching out where I want the hills to be going. I'm essentially just doing like a grasslandy type of path for him. Nothing too crazy. I know I usually go crazy. I'm trying to keep it simple and just doing a simple little path as my first base. We'll go crazy later. Punch! Once I have the rough shape that I'm going for the hills, I kind of just refine that shape and make sure my blade is at a slanted angle so it gives a more sloped kind of hill and not just like a steep, like cliffy kind of start to it, if that makes any sense. But let me tell you, I don't know how some of these miniature people are so good with an X-Acto knife and just a utility knife, because man, it is so hard to cut this stuff because I'm a newbie, so what can you expect? I have no idea what I'm doing. But it's just getting everywhere, and it's messy, and I'm so scared I'm gonna snap the knife, and things are just dangerous and scary and fun, and I love it, and I'm scared of it. And to build up the hills even more and to kind of smooth out, because let's be honest, this pink foam doesn't look that pretty, I'm going to be using Sculptamold to actually build the hills up and get rid of all those seams and just make it look more earthy looking. I tried to add paint, but let me tell you, that looks disgusting. And it ended up not working out anyway because the Sculptamold, when it dried out, it was just like really, really pale and light. And me and Sarah are back and forth. I think this looks like weird peanut butter. She thinks it looks like queso dip. So let me know in the comments which one do you think it looks more like. And this stuff kind of just made me feel like a kid playing with it, because it's very messy and like you're playing with like mud. It's honestly what it felt like. That's the best way I could equate it to. It felt like playing with mud. But I have to say, it was really fun. And once I got all the little hills and shapes that I wanted, because there was no rhyme or reason, I just did what I felt was right, because let's be honest, somewhere in Earth probably looks like this. I wanted to add more of a pathy kind of look down the center, and so I mixed up Mod Podge and some sand, and I'm just kind of dabbing it around where I wanted a little bit more gravelly look. And once that was dry, I just went over the entire thing in varying shades of brown, where I wanted the path to be lighter and I wanted the hills to be darker, and I just kept building up different shades to give more of a tonal variance, because Earth is not just one shade, it is many, many, many different shades. And once that had dried, I went over everything with a dark brown wash. And that was just to really make all of those details that the Sculptamold created and that the sand and Mod Podge created really pop. And then after that, I went over it with a dry brush, just to really, really make sure that you could see that all the, the hills, it didn't really matter because it's going to be covered in static grass, but at least in terms of the pathways, I really wanted to make sure you could tell that it was a path and there was gravel and rocks and there was texture there. For the hills, it didn't really matter, but it was good practice nonetheless. And speaking of static grass, it's time to apply the static grass, and I'm using a Static King. Now, I want a disclaimer here that Sarah made it seem like she knew what she was doing and she knew what to do. And granted, she's never actually done static grass before. I just know she's wanted to do it like ever since I met her. And so now we're finally doing it. And we got to the point where we added the glue. We put all the static grass in to the Static Grass King applicator and we turned it on. That doesn't seem to really be working now, does it?
It's not working.
We're stupid. This was supposed to be foolproof.
Above, I was finding about an inch above the grass worked great.
Was I too high?
Work your way across.
This plugged in too, so you need a little power bar or an extension cord, because this is really, it's not very long, so.
It's showing you it's not a good conductor.
I'll show you how
maybe not.
Sculpting.
I've been saying this man's name wrong for so many years. I'm sorry, Luke.
So after much trial and tribulation, we determined that it was probably the fact that we were using a battery and not the power cord. But the power cord conveniently came separate, so we had to buy it and wait eagerly to see if that would fix it. But thankfully it did. So we could get back to adding the static grass like it was intended. And now that the hills were looking hilly and even the path had a little bit of grass added to it, it was just then to add extra little bits on top of that, adding little bushes, adding little tufts of grass here and there where you wanted it, and just adding things to make it look more like a grassland. And I just had fun with it. There was no rhyme or reason, just where it felt right is where I put things. It being my first time, I didn't want to have to be a perfectionist or anything. I just wanted to have fun with it. And with that, this guy is done. His base is done and he is done. And now we can finally look at the final result.